Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us. My name is Hulak, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Grand Media Center today. Our second event today is dedicated to startups. Specifically for this purpose, we have invited you to discuss the way our Ukrainian startups are developing and to present a study that the authors called Resilient Innovation, Ukrainian Startups Fighting Today. So today we are going to find out about the condition of this ecosystem in Ukraine. We will discuss how other startups can get involved in reconstruction and transformation of Ukraine, and we will discuss this topic with our speakers. Let me introduce them. Joining us today are Łukasz Wawak, project manager of the Polish-Ukrainian Startup Bridge, and Yana Hulak, project manager of the Ukrainian Startup Fund. And also joining us is Alexander Iyevlev, physical therapist, coordinator of the medical studies of the Compact Mobility startup. Thank you for joining us today. So first of all, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Łukasz to present the results of the study, the condition of the support of startups ecosystem of Ukraine. Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be here in the wonderful city of Kiev. Behind me, you can see my language. If anything comes up not quite clear in Ukrainian, I will try to speak Ukrainian. So anyway, you can ask me to specify anything. So I'm in charge of implementing Startup Bridge. This is the foundation, a project that we founded back in 2018, thanks to the support of the Polish Ministry of Foundations and Regional Policy, thanks to Polish aid program. That is the source of funding of the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ukraine is the most important country which is a part of Polish aid program, and we focus on Ukraine as a country which is now defending us, defending Europe, but also as the country of innovations. We are seeing a lot of successful stories of Ukrainian startups. We see how quickly the drone industry startups are developing, but we also see other Ukrainian industries, and it was the idea that was laid as the foundation of our project. From the very beginning, we've found out that Ukraine is a country where where citizens have a good education, where people are looking for chances to improve their lives, their situations, and where people have entrepreneurs motivation. And starting from 2018, we've launched this program, and we keep adding something new to this program year by year. And every year we put together a report in coordination with the Ukrainian Startup Fund, and its goal is not only to demonstrate the successful stories of Ukraine in Poland, but also in other countries of the world, to demonstrate the development of Ukrainian startups. I was looking for information, and it was one of the first reports published in English language, a report that would at least be suitable for foreign media, for European media. And the first time we published it was in January 2022, and it was one of the most popular reports that we've published. It was one of the most popular sources of information about Ukrainian economy. So we continue this cooperation with the Ukrainian Startup Fund, but also with institutional businesses of Ukrainian startup ecosystem, not only startups, but also innovative companies, including Sigma Software Lab Accelerator, the 1991 Accelerator, Ecosystem Accelerator, and our today's media partner, Ukraine Media Center. We really appreciate this opportunity to disclose this information about Ukraine so we could tell Poland about Ukrainian startups so the world is, how do I put it correctly, so the world could have the methodological part of the report that was put together by a team of Polish analysts. They are totally independent, but the source of information were the Ukrainian startups. But what's the most important? The most important statements that we can make based on our report, our study, is like the first of all, 100 startups have taken place in this year's study. The same number of startups were taking part in the survey in 2023. 85, almost 86% of them are startups that are either located or have their business operations in Ukraine. That's very positive information. Among them, 4 startups came back to Ukraine. For us as Polish, from the Polish perspective, it's not quite positive because we would like Ukrainian startups to come to us, develop their innovations in our land. Why so? Because, first of all, as the Polish investors see it, what do they see? What are they looking for? Ukrainian entrepreneurs develop innovative solutions very quickly on a quality basis and cheaper. That's extremely good situation for Polish entrepreneurs open to new solutions, new innovative solutions of the problems that exist. Our economy is developing very quickly. We are open, how do I put it? We're absorbing the innovations. Another piece of information which is important is that more than 40% of startups staying in Ukraine have their headquarters in Kiev. From the moment the Startup Bridge was launched, we were paying a lot of attention to this point so that the startups that we support don't only originate from Kiev. We wanted to look not only in the places like Lviv, Kharkiv, and Odessa, but also in smaller centers of innovations such as Zhytomyr, such as Mykolaiv. And we've seen that there's a lot of projects, a lot of initiatives going on there that eventually end up in Kiev. Well, it happens. This is the role of the capital city. Also, what I would like to add is that a lot of our startups, 1/3 of the startups, are the startups that were established not later than in the year 2021. for a life cycle of a startup, it's a lot. If a startup is 3 years in Poland, it's quite an experienced team that responds to their clients, those who are interested in their services, and the same happens with the startups which were covered by our study. So what are Ukrainian startups looking for? What are the results of the study? 91 responders said that they see a lot of potential for development. That's positive information. 45 startups mentioned that today's situation is average, not as hard comparing to previous years. We could say that it's a positive result. The entrepreneurs have high hopes in the future, and we want to support them in coordination with the Ukrainian Startup Fund. But let me put a period here because I can keep talking on and on. Ukrainian language is no restriction to me. Well, Łukasz, first of all, we would like to thank you for your wonderful Ukrainian language. Well, I keep studying. Well, what I was told in the border is that you're supposed to speak the state language, so I'm trying. Thank you. Ms. Yana, let me give a floor to you. Tell us about the role of the Ukrainian Startup Fund and the support programs that are currently being implemented, and probably a little bit about your plans. Thanks a lot. It's my pleasure to be here. It's my pleasure to be involved in presentation of this study. First of all, we would like to extend the words of appreciation to our partners who keep working systemically on the development of Ukrainian startup ecosystem, who put together the studies, the surveys, which are important for us as Ukrainian players to evaluate the climate in the ecosystem, to understand which are the support programs that are the most popular for the startups, which are the most suitable for the startups and for the international partners, generally for international community, to understand that Ukraine is a country that is not just waging a war, but also developing a breakthrough innovations. There are startups who take responsibility for the prosperous future of Ukraine and who do things that are necessary now and for innovative that will be necessary for innovative Ukraine for in a couple of years. So I want to thank you, and I want to thank Łukasz and all of the team of Polish-Ukrainian Startup Bridge for support, for different tools of support, for acceleration program, and the things that favor Ukrainian startups. And also thank you for your wonderful Ukrainian. That's very pleasant to hear when it comes to the study. As I've mentioned before, for us to understand the climate in ecosystem for small, medium, and large enterprises is a necessary thing to design our support programs and to understand what the startups need the most, whether it's financial support or is it the support in scaling up the operations in international markets. And this survey covers all those aspects as the most pressing needs to this for the startups. And the positive factor is that more than 91% of the startups, and this figure is not smaller than 2 years ago, they mentioned that they see a positive outlook for development in Ukraine. And when it comes to the situation of challenges existing in our country now, it's a very cool result for us as a fund, as a stakeholder in this ecosystem, which sets the framework, those who put together the programs of financial and non-financial support, it seems like 69% of the startups mentioned that the ecosystem improved compared to the previous years, and it means that in Ukraine currently we have a framework, both legal framework and real framework, in which the founders, the prospective young teams, can find tools for support. I'm talking about grant opportunities, but that Ukrainian Startup Fund was extended. We have more than 470 startups in our portfolio that got grant support. They represent different industries, starting from artificial intelligence and agricultural technologies, in amount of more than $8 million, and we're humbled by the fact that we still have such tools of support, such as grant opportunities provided by our European partners and state funding, and understanding the situation in our ecosystem starting from the beginning of the full-scale invasion. We've realized that we need to cooperate more. We need to intensify integration with the European Innovative Council, and we started raising grants and financial tools from there. And now we have the consortium Seeds of Bravery, founded in Ukraine, and we've extended the grants to the startups in amount of more than 12 million euro. Then there's a lot of acceleration programs in Ukraine. We were talking with the partners on this topic. There are more than 53 programs where founders, such as student startups and more grown-ups, can come and get the support and live as full teams that are ready to scale up to international markets. As Ukrainian Startup Fund, we also provide the support for participation in international startup delegations to the global exhibitions, such as Consumer World Show in the United States, in Europe, all across the world. And it's an important tool. Why? Because unfortunately the investment agreements are not being entered into online. For investors, it's important to see whom they invest in, and it's important for them to see that Ukrainian tech sector is alive. Sometimes we get approached by the people in such exhibitions, and they ask, have you made it all the way from Ukraine? On top of realizing that there are startups being born in Ukraine. So there is a lot of mechanisms of support in Ukraine. We have city legal regime, and as Ukrainian Startup Fund, we are always ready to help with any legal issues to make sure that the startups understand how they are supposed to be developing in Ukrainian legal framework. Now the team of the Ministry of Digitalization works on the development of the joint startup ecosystem or shared startup ecosystem, and we are always ready to get involved in such initiatives. And it's good that such things happen before the new year, because it provides us with better opportunities to prepare programs for the next year, to understand where we should focus on, which tools we're supposed to add. So once again, I want to thank you. I think the figures are looking quite optimistic, but at the same time very honest, and we see where we should apply more efforts. Also, I would like to add a little bit about verticals and startups that have taken place, that have taken part in the survey this year. 25 startups were surveyed, and we tried to survey the sectors which seem to be the most perspective. We're talking about the youth industry. This is the intersection of two sectors, civil and military, and in the platform of our fund, a couple of years ago, we've established the cluster of defense technologies, Brave One, that provides momentum for the development of military innovations. It helps them to get to the front line and does a lot to make sure that the defense ecosystem is developing in Ukraine. We also shift our focus in the startup fund. We had a grant program for the dual purpose products, and now we've opened a new grant program for the developers of firefighting drones at the request of State Emergency Service of Ukraine. So we were launching the grants for 20 plus sectors such as agricultural technologies, artificial intelligence, Web3, and now we focus on more of a niche stories. That's why we were trying to get health tech, med tech startups involved, because this is what Ukraine and the world needs. A lot of investors are interested in those startups because they gather data and they open more perspectives for funding. And as Ukrainian startup funds, we're shifting our priorities and we were trying to engage the same audience for this survey. Yana, it was really interesting to hear about the design. When it comes to the spheres where the startups are operating, probably the defense sector is the leader, but talking about the percentage, what are the top 4 or 5 industries in the sector? Well, I would like to mention the win-win strategy that was recently adopted by the team of the Ministry of Digital Transformation, and the strategy within the framework of which we are moving along with the most of the players of the innovations ecosystem. So the top is the military innovations, talking about win-win strategy. It doesn't come as rating, but I would like to mention 5 industries that were mentioned there. Is first dual use, then edtech, educational technology, something that we need to invest in. We need to keep investing in education technologies, then health tech, biotech, everything related to medicine, health, and future. When it comes to interesting industries, it's space. This is where Ukraine has a pretty good outlook in terms of, say, 5 years. And energy techs, those are the industries that we focus on. And also it's important in Ukraine to develop the deep tech, the deep technologies. We have a couple of programs focused on that. We see that Ukrainians are classy now, and it's easier to make some soft, but some hard stories, they require more time for research, and we try to focus on that as well. Well, based on what Łukasz was saying, it seems that Ukrainian startups are quite stable. Is it really so? What are your observations? Well, sometimes I keep asking myself a question. Imagine, like, if Ukrainians, representatives of startups, are capable of continuing such things, such systemic things, given the challenges of today, what we could do after that we are through those challenges. So talking about stability, it's a wow quality of Ukraine, not only representatives of startup ecosystems. Yes, the stability, the ability to think ambitiously even today. So what we're observing is that startup ecosystem, that the number of startups has not decreased, and now the cost of this ecosystem is evaluated at the point of $25 billion, and the capitalization has grown twice since 2022. And it's an indicator that shows that yes, there are challenges, but the startups in Ukraine continue developing and adapting to those sectors that are the most, so to say, intense and in demand now. Well, really, sometimes it seems like this sector is, so to say, closed, but when you keep finding out more new things, it gets more and more interesting. Alexander, you are a representative of a comeback mobility, of one of those startups. So can you please tell us about your startup and the problems you're facing today? Thank you for your invitation. We're comeback mobility. We work in a healthcare sector. In medtech sector, we study fractures of the lower limbs, and we work on improving the recuperation process after the fractures to make it faster. And we have data that confirms that our patients recuperate 50% quicker than others using our technologies. So basically the problems that were mentioned, okay, it's interesting for everyone to see what it's like to be a Ukrainian startup during the war. Everybody understands that it means a lot of challenges, but really what it is like. Well, there are 3 major problems in medtech. First, operational information and financial programs. When it comes to operational programs, it's about legislation. There is no procedure for permit for study, just like we have it for the medicines, but the same, but with the medical devices. So there's a lot of difficult work to do, but we keep making it. We opened 12 facilities in 12 hospitals in Kiev and Dnipro, like research facilities, but we would like to standardize this procedure because there's a lot of issues coming up, and we're ready to take part in the process of development of legislation because we have a lot of experience with. We know how to make it through all those issues. We are ready to work with them. And another problem is information problem. It's a huge problem. As a medical expert, I can tell you doctors, physical therapists, those who work in the area of rehabilitation, they are not quite aware of innovative technologies that we implement now. And it's another problem because every doctor that we talk to, we need to communicate to them that it works, it's important. Well, kind of like that. And the way it influences, we can improve the sector of rehabilitation after fractures, specifically now when there are active combat operations. There are a lot of military who have the fractures of the lower limbs. So now we work on studying those kind of fractures. We can improve the process of their rehabilitation, make it more efficient, to expedite it, and it's not only about the quality of recuperation, but also, the way that the patients recuperate after the fracture, it influences the way they recuperate in general. And the third, the financial sector, all those processes, they require a lot of investments because it's not only about new clinics and work with the patients, it's also about the work with the doctors. It's about funding for opening new clinics. It's about the funding for new study where we identify the ways the patients walk after the fracture, the way that they put pressure on their feet, how this pressure is being distributed. Well, Mr. Alexander, do you actually use any support program in Ukraine? Well, it's difficult to say. Now we're cooperating with the Ministry of Healthcare. They help us. They help us to make it to the hospitals, to communicate with the directorships of the hospitals. But again, there should be a process in place under which we would be able to get a permit for studies for our research in transparent way, because we're working on another stage of studies, because every localization of fracture, when it comes to section, even section of a specific bone, we have to make a dedicated study, because the process of recuperation and regrowth is different. Like, what is the pressure the patient puts on their leg? How many steps do they make? So basically, yes, we would like to have more attention to our startup and the medtech sector, because it's a promising technology, promising sector for further development, for work with the patients. Well, Ms. Yana, then the question to you, well, now it's important for all of us to take part in recuperation of our economy, and we understand that startups are integrated in this process. So according to your evaluation, how intense is the input of the startups? Well, I would like to comment on this So support, now that we're talking about medtech, this is a promising sector, but it requires a lot of capital investments. Now our grant programs are $25,000 to $50,000. Now it will be limited to 40,000, but there was a grant program established to launch the startup ecosystem to provide the financial support for the programs on the early stages of development so that they could raise investments earlier. So I've checked the information, but Back Mobility didn't get any grants, but they were representing Ukraine in a consumer show, and it opened new ways for the support in the United States. So we were not able to provide financial support, but we were able to help in another sphere. I hope that we should talk a little bit more in detail a little bit later. So when it comes to your question, the innovations that we're discussing now, dual use innovations, and the innovations that don't only help in the front line but also in everyday life, everything starting from simple things to quantum computers. Startups do a lot to help Ukraine now and to support the post-war reconstruction as well. We see it from different perspectives. We can see startups building module buildings. We can see startups making prosthetics, bionic prosthetics. Recently, our Ukrainian startup Sila, that is developing a bionic prosthetic of a knee, ended up in top 10 of the top 10 of the startups of the world, and it demonstrates to the world what Ukrainian startups are dealing with. So their contribution is incredible, both from the point of view of support of Ukraine, but also we have to understand that it's a long game, and when it comes to innovation, specifically clinical innovations where R&D takes 5 to 10 years, we cannot see the impact right now, but we have to keep investing in it to make sure that in 10 years Ukraine comes as a prosperous country. Dear friends, now if you have any comments or questions, you have an opportunity to ask them. If you have any questions, please let me know. Get the microphone, raise your hand. Good afternoon, Volodymyr Zubchenko, the head of Scientific Park of Kiev, Taras Shevchenko University. First of all, I would like to thank Polish-Ukrainian Startup Bridge for the support that you've been extending for a number of years. You help the projects, help our projects make their projects come true. Thank you, Łukasz. I want to thank your team. And the question is as follows. In our institute, in our university, we exercise a lot of activities such as boot camps, Ukrainian innovation festivals. And I would like to ask you a question. From your perspective, what is the role of cooperation between academic environment, grant programs such as Ukrainian and Polish Startup Bridge? What's your vision of the support that Ukrainian Polish Startup Bridge can provide in the post-war Ukraine from the perspective of cooperation with the academia? So what's our role? I can tell you from the Polish perspective, there was a question which support programs Alexander's company is taking part in. In Poland, we say that the best support program is the real customers who have real money and buy real products and services. But obviously, the products such as medtech, as deep tech, they require a lot of time, they require a lot of motivation, probably even more motivation than time, probably even more motivation than money. And from Polish perspective, the universities are supposed to be the source of new ideas, the place where the laboratory work is going on, where the first iterations of the projects are being tested in laboratory level. but there should be somebody between customers and universities, someone who helps to transform an engineering idea into a product or a service. Because I also cooperate with Polish and other international startups on top of Ukrainian ones, and I see that among the scientists, among engineers, the majority of them is focused on the development, and that's the right thing to do. That's how it's supposed to be done. But a moment comes when you need to demonstrate a result, and it's better if it happens sooner than later. And the role of universities, specifically the business universities, is to uh, communicate that knowledge, to bring that knowledge about business models to scientific faculties. In Poland, I've come across this story when we had to teach the engineers how to calculate financial models, how to communicate with the clients, but you have to build the successful teams where there are marketologists, engineers, and there are salespeople. People who may not even understand what's going on there inside, but they can broker the technologies. They can look for clients. If not clients, then the testers. If not testers, then haters of that idea the startups are working on, because negative feedback is also a very, very useful thing that startups first disrespect, but critics from the very beginning, from the market perspective, it works. It works real good, and it helps to limit your expenses. And I have a little bit to add. Well, as long as all of the specialists who work in their sectors, they graduate from the universities, they are supposed to be aware of the existing innovations that come to the market, those who are only being researched. And I think it's important to make sure that it's included into the curriculums, and so that the curriculums are flexible, so they can be adapted to the needs of today, as both in financial and economic sector and in medical sector. And I think that it should all be integrated into curricula, so that the future experts are aware what are they going to work with in future. Well, there was, I think there was an intention of another question or comment. Thank you, Vladko Yaroslav, Суспільне мовлення. Thank you for this interesting information. I have two questions to Mr. Łukasz. First of all, in Poland, we have to realize that startups are being implemented, but it's only some percentage of them that yield some success. So what is the situation in Poland? What is the percentage of Polish startups that are eventually being implemented, and what country, in your opinion, can serve as an example, which can be exemplary? In my opinion, it's Israel, where high percentage of Israel high percentage of startups are achieving certain success. I mean, they are being then probably bought by the United States. But then also a question to Yana: what is the percentage of successful Ukrainian startups? Let me start. I'm not aware of the exact figures, but I can tell you the situation is 100% similar to Ukraine. A small percentage of the projects is successful. Small percentage is just like they were in the very beginning, when startups didn't do any pilot. They were not looking for any alternative way of development. It's an unnatural and dangerous situation for a startup, I would say. And which country can be exemplary? Well, every country that stands on guard of the intellectual property, every country that helps the entrepreneurs to build the center of decision making at their place. What we appreciate about Ukrainian startups is their openness to international markets. It's the result. It's not the cause. The market in Ukraine is small, notwithstanding the fact that the country is big and motivated. The capital is not huge in the country. So Ukrainian startups are looking for clients even if they don't have a product or a ready-made service, and it's a perfect way for a startup. But what I keep telling to the Polish startups, that going on a global scale in a market like Poland for a startup is a dangerous idea. I would rather recommend looking for clients in Poland, to focus, to build a real stable platform, and then scale up to international markets. Because if you leave Poland or Ukraine for Germany, on the very first day you may find out that there is competition, that no one's waiting for your products and services there. So you need to be even quicker, even cheaper, even more innovative. It's a dangerous way. That's why the result is like 1 to 3% of the real implementations of the products in the market. Yana? Thank you. It was a real cool question. In fact, it's very difficult to track some real number. I don't think there is any statistics worldwide, but when it comes to startups, we're talking about venture ecosystem, venture businesses. It's a risky ecosystem. Venture means risks. So right away we should be talking that any technology, any startup is a risky technology. That's why the percentage is lower than 100. And according to what we feel, maybe 1 in 3 teams have real good traction and they stay on the market for a long time. But there is another thing. As an example, you've mentioned Israel and America. For example, the mentality in America is like the investors would rather invest in startups where the team is made up of founders who committed a number of mistakes. They were through a number of failures, and then they were able to build a successful story. So in Ukraine, we should come to this thinking that we shouldn't perceive mistakes as mistakes, but rather an experience. And America, that we put as example, is being perceived as a country of startup ecosystems, but the majority of startups became successful only after a third attempt. For example, Ukraine is a young country. Ukrainian startup ecosystem is young. Now the teams are only being built, and we see the number of startups growing year by year, even despite the challenges. It's difficult to outline what is startup, what is not at current stage, but mistakes are not an indicator of a failure. It's an indicator of experience. Thank you, and I would like to thank everyone for this conversation. Thank you for this study that you've just presented. If I may, I would like to thank our partners once again and the team that was working on this report, on this study. But of course, we would like to thank Ukrainian Startup Fund, the Ministry of Development Funds and Regional Policy, and Polish Aid Program, because we were able to make it thanks to their input. And we would like to thank all of the startups for taking part. All the information from the startups is the feedback, and what I would like to leave you with are three words: education, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Thank you. Thank you for these words, and I would like to thank everybody working in this sector, those who make our country stronger. We would like to thank our security and defense forces, thanks to whom we can gather and hold events like this. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes.